You were dead for 2 whole days before I even knew. It was afternoon, late August, the end of the long, lonely summer after 6th grade. My mom called me in from outside, and I knew something was wrong. Really, really wrong, just by looking at her. I got scared then, thinking that maybe something had happened to my dad. But since the divorce, would it even matter to my mom if he got hurt? Then I thought maybe something was wrong with my brother. Zoo, Mom started. I heard the refrigerator hum, a poink poink from the shower dripping, a ticking that comes from the old clock on the mantel, whose time is always wrong unless I remember to wind it. Long streaks of sun crossed through the window like spirits through the walls. They lay down on the carpet and were still. Mom spoke evenly, her words coming out at normal speed, yet everything seemed slowed down, as if time itself had grown heavy, and maybe like time had stopped existing altogether. Franny Jackson drowned. 3 words. They probably took only a couple of seconds to come out, but they seemed to last about a half an hour. My first thought was, that's weird. Why is she using Franny's last name? I couldn't remember my mom ever using your last name. You were always just Franny to her. And then I realized the thing that she said after she said your last name. Drowned. She said you had drowned. She was on vacation, Mom continued. I noticed how her brow was perfectly still. She was sitting, how rigid her shoulders were. A beach vacation. Then she added, as if it would somehow help the things she'd said make any sense at all, in Maryland. But of course her words didn't make any sense. There were a million reasons they didn't. They didn't make sense because it hadn't been that long since I'd seen you, and you were as alive as anyone then. Her words didn't make any sense because you were always such a good swimmer, better than I was from the instant we met. They didn't make any sense because the way things ended between us was not the way they were supposed to end. They were not the way anything should ever end. And yet here was my mom. She was right in front of me and she was saying these words. And if her words were true, if she was right about the things she was telling me, it meant that the last glimpse I had of you, walking down the hallway on the last day of 6th grade, carrying those bags of your wet clothes and crying, would be the final one I'd ever have. I stared at my mom. No, she didn't, I said. You hadn't. You couldn't have. I was sure of that. Mom opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again. She didn't, I insisted, louder this time. It was Tuesday, Mom said. Her voice was quieter than before, as if my getting louder had sucked the strength from her own breath. It happened on Tuesday. I only just found out. It was Thursday now. 2 whole days had gone by. Whenever I think about those 2 days, about the space between you ending and me knowing, I think about the stars. Did you know the light from our nearest star takes 4 years to reach us? Which means when we see any star, we are really seeing what it looked like in the past. All those twinkling lights, every star in the sky could have burned out years ago. The entire night sky could be empty this very minute, and we wouldn't even know it. She could swim, I said. She was a good swimmer, remember? When Mom said nothing, I tried again. Remember, Mom? Mom just closed her eyes and placed her forehead in the palm of her hands. It's impossible, I insisted. Why couldn't she see how impossible this was? When Mom looked up, she spoke slowly, like she was trying really hard to make sure I heard every single word. Even good swimmers can drown, Zoo. But it doesn't make sense. How could she? Not everything makes sense, Zoo. Some things just happen. She shook her head and took a deep breath. This probably doesn't even seem real. It doesn't seem real to me either. Then she closed her eyes for a few long seconds. When she opened them up again, her face twisted up in a terrible way. Tears began spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry." She looked grotesque, her face all crumpled like that. I hated the way she looked. I turned away from her. Those nonsense words are still tumbling in my head. You drowned, swimming in Maryland, 2 days ago. No, none of it made sense. Not then and not later that night when the earth dipped towards the stars. Not the next morning when it rolled back around to sunlight again. It didn't make sense that the world could roll back to sunlight again. All this time, I thought that our story was just that, our story. But it turns out you had your own story, and I had mine. Our stories might have been overlapped for a while, long enough that they even looked like the same story, but they were different. And that made me realize this. Everyone's story is different, all the time. No one is ever really together, even if it looks like for a while that they were. There was a time when my mom knew what had happened to you, when the weight of it had already hit her and I was just running through the grass like it was any other day. And there was a time when someone else knew and my mom didn't. And a time when your mom knew and almost no one else on the planet did. And that means there was a time when you were gone and no one on earth had any idea. Just you, all alone, disappearing into the water and no one even wondering yet. And that's an incredibly lonely thing to think about. Some things just happen, my mom had said. It was a terrible answer, the very worst. Mrs. Turchin says when something happens that no one can explain, it means you have bumped up against the edge of human knowledge. And that is when you need science. Science is the process for finding the explanations that no one else can give you. I'll bet you never even met Mrs. Turchin. Some things just happen is not an explanation. It is not remotely scientific. But for weeks and weeks, that was all I had. Until I stood in the basement room looking at jellyfish on the other side of the glass.